Order. Before we come to the statement on Commonhold and Leasehold reform, I once again note for the second day in a row my disappointment about briefings to the media before important announcements are brought to the House. As the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee recently stated, making the most important statements in the first instance to Parliament means doing so before they're made to the media, not at the first available opportunity thereafter. These are the government's own rules in its own ministerial code, and it must do better. I'm defending backbenchers on both sides. They've been elected here to hear it. Sky News and BBC is not the way that we do business. If there are issues of market sensitivity, or indeed any other sensitivities, ministers are welcome to seek advice from my office or the clerks on how the best balance of these sensitivities might legitimate or need to update me before the media. We've got to work together on this. The message is clear. I'm not in charge of the code, the Prime Minister is. He needs to take the code more seriously. We come to the statement. Minister Matthew Pennycook.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My department always strives to ensure the House is updated at the earliest possible opportunity, and I note and appreciate fully the points you've made and ensure they're passed on to my ministerial colleagues. With your permission, Mr Speaker, I'd like to make a statement on the Government's draft Commonhold and Leasehold Reform Bill. We made a clear and unambiguous commitment in our manifesto to act where previous governments had failed and finally bring the feudal leasehold system to an end. We did so on the basis of a firm conviction that it is only by extinguishing fully the historical iniquities on which the present leasehold system rests that we can ensure that the dream of home ownership is made real for millions of households across the country. Today, the Government has published and laid the Commonhold and Leasehold Reform Bill in draft for pre-legislative scrutiny by the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee. This ambitious piece of legislation will modernise property law, deliver a fair and efficient modern housing market, and most importantly, Mr Speaker, transform the experience of home ownership for millions of leaseholders across the country. The draft bill includes the following key provisions: a new legal framework for Commonhold to reform and reinvigorate this radical improvement on leasehold ownership, a statutory restriction on new leasehold flats to ensure that in future Commonhold is the default tenure, a new process for converting to Commonhold from leasehold to make conversion easier so more homeowners can enjoy this improved form of ownership, the abolition of leasehold forfeiture and its replacement with a fairer system of lease enforcement, the repeal of draconian powers relating to rent charges on freehold estates, and the capping of ground rent for older leases at £250 per year, changing to a peppercorn after 40 years. Let me expand briefly, Mr Speaker, on each of these core measures, beginning with Commonhold. As you know, Mr Speaker, Commonhold is a modern home ownership structure that is widely used around the world. It is not merely an alternative to leasehold ownership, but a radical improvement on it. At the heart of the Commonhold model is a simple principle. The people who should own buildings and who should exercise control over their management, shared facilities and related costs are not third-party landlords, but the people who live in the flats within them and who have a direct stake in their upkeep. Commonhold ensures that the interests of homeowners are preserved in perpetuity. It transfers decision-making to them so that homeowners have a greater say over how their home is managed and the bills they pay, as well as the flexibility to respond to the changing needs of their building and its residents. Mr Speaker, for a variety of reasons, Commonhold failed to establish itself following its introduction in 2004. As a result, there are fewer than 20 Commonhold developments in existence today, and the 2002 legal framework is hopelessly outdated. The provisions in the draft bill build on the publication of our Commonhold White Paper in March last year, which confirmed the detail of our Commonhold reform programme and responded to the Law Commission's thorough and expert review of Commonhold law. The result is legislation that will reinvigorate Commonhold through the introduction of a comprehensive new legal framework that will enable Commonhold to be used in the widest possible range of settings. To ensure Commonhold becomes the default tenure as our manifesto promised, the draft bill also includes provisions to ban the use of leasehold for new flats. Once enacted, this will ensure that, other than in exceptional circumstances, all flats are provided as Commonhold. These provisions will work in tandem with the ban on the use of leasehold for new houses contained in the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act 2024. Alongside the publication of the draft bill today, we're publishing a Moving to Commonhold consultation seeking input from industry and consumers on precisely how we implement the new ban. The feedback received will ensure we can proceed with a smooth transition to Commonhold for new developments, while at the same time protecting the supply of new homes and determining whether there is a case for any justified exemptions. The draft bill also includes measures, Mr Speaker, to make it easier for existing leaseholders to convert their buildings to Commonhold. The existing law already sets out a process for conversion, but it is one that requires consent from everyone with an interest in the block. This sets an unacceptably high bar and means that Commonhold is not achievable if even a single unit owner, lender or the existing freeholder objects. The draft bill will introduce a new process for conversion, one which brings conversion into line with wider enfranchisement processes and will make conversion possible if at least 50% of qualifying leaseholders agree. Mr Speaker, while the previous government's Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act does provide leaseholders with important rights and protections, on these benches we have always maintained that it was a distinctly unambitious piece of legislation that left untouched serious problems, including the disproportionate and draconian threat of forfeiture as a means of ensuring compliance with a lease agreement. For too long, outdated forfeiture laws have allowed landlords to threaten people with losing their home and hard-earned equity over small debts of as little as £350 or any amount if left unpaid for 3 years. The draft bill contains provisions to abolish forfeiture and replace it with a modern, proportionate lease enforcement system that addresses breaches fairly with appropriate safeguards and judicial oversight. Mr Speaker, you'll know that before Christmas we launched 2 comprehensive consultations seeking views on how best to implement new consumer protections for homeowners on freehold estates and the ways in which we might reduce the prevalence of privately managed estates over the coming years. To further enhance protections for homeowners on freehold estates, the draft bill will also repeal enforcement powers that apply to estate rent charges on them. These powers, often difficult to find in deeds and poorly understood by buyers, can lead to rent charge owners taking possession of or granting a lease over a freehold home as a result of small sums outstanding. That is not just unfair, it creates real barriers to home ownership and property sales. We will remove these wholly disproportionate and outdated remedies for enforcing rent charges by repealing sections 121 and 122 of the Law of Property Act 1925, including estate rent charges. Mr Speaker, the Government is acutely aware that the cost of living remains a pressing concern for leaseholders across England and Wales, and that those who remain subject to unfair and unreasonable practices need urgent relief. That is why last summer we consulted, jointly with the Welsh Government, on strengthening leaseholder protections over charges and services. That consultation included proposals to reform the Section 20 major works procedure, increase transparency over service charges, and enhance access to redress through the relevant provisions in the Act. We thank all those who responded to the consultation and will set out details of how we intend to implement the measures in question as soon as possible. However, the Government is determined to go further to alleviate the cost of living pressures facing leaseholders. In our manifesto, we promise to tackle unregulated and unaffordable ground rent charges. The draft bill honours that commitment. As the House will know, historically ground rents, which often entail no service being provided whatsoever, were of low or nominal value. However, over the past 2 decades, a practice has developed of freeholders including high and escalating ground rent clauses in leases. Such clauses are causing leaseholders considerable financial strain, and some are unable to sell or remortgage their properties as a result. The draft bill will cap ground rents at £250 per year initially, changing to a peppercorn after 40 years. This will provide immediate financial relief for leaseholders with high and harmful ground rents, while the longer-term change to a peppercorn cap will eliminate the 2-tier market between new and older leases, delivering a fair and efficient modern housing market. These reforms will necessarily have effects on existing contractual arrangements and investments, something which this Government does not undertake lightly, Mr Speaker. However, the Government has a clear mandate to tackle unregulated and unaffordable ground rent charges, and our approach has been designed to strike a fair balance between the interests of leaseholders, freeholders and investors, maintaining the reputation of the UK as a safe place to invest. Finally, Mr Speaker, as I've made it clear to the House on previous occasions, the last Government's Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act contains a number of specific but serious flaws that prevent certain provisions from operating as intended and that need to be rectified via primary legislation. While not included in the draft bill, our intention is to rectify those flaws in primary legislation. Among other things, this will allow us to commence the 2024 Act's enfranchisement provisions, making it cheaper and easier for leaseholders to extend their lease or buy their freehold. Mr Speaker, to conclude, the publication of the draft bill today is a historic moment. It marks the beginning of the end for the feudal leasehold system that has tainted the dream of home ownership for so many. I look forward to working closely with the Select Committee as they perform their invaluable role in scrutinising carefully this draft legislation, and I encourage honourable members from across the House to engage with it and the accompanying consultation on banning new leasehold flats. Mr Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Minister Gareth Bacon.
Mr Speaker, I thank the Minister for his remarks and for advanced sight of his statement. Progress on leasehold reform is to be welcomed. Labour promised this when they stood for election 18 months ago, so it is about time they got on with it, as the previous Conservative government had started to. Mr Speaker, the previous Conservative government began the process of fundamental reform to the existing system of leaseholds by making it easier to extend a lease or to buy a freehold, increasing the standard lease extension term to 990 years and giving leaseholders greater transparency over their service charges. His Majesty's opposition remain committed to giving leaseholders a fair deal, want householders to have security for the future and will continue to hold the government to account on this. Now, the government made big promises at the last election to leaseholders. Do they believe that this bill is the summit of their ambitions? And what about the 2024 Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act? What are their plans to implement secondary legislation? There are opportunities to improve leaseholder situations that are available to the government now. Why have they not implemented these changes? Surely, if they were serious about reform for leaseholders, they would have picked up the 2024 Act and run with it, rather than doing nothing until now. The Minister had just said, and I quote, "I have made clear to the House on previous occasions the last government's Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act contains a small number of specific but serious flaws that prevent certain provisions from operating as intended and that need to be rectified via primary legislation." He then goes on, Mr Speaker, while not included in the draft bill, our intention is to rectify these flaws in primary legislation. Perhaps the Minister could tell us what these flaws are. And if the government have already identified them, why are the corrections not included in the forthcoming bill? Surely now would be the time to rectify them. So if not now, when? And I would be remiss not to comment on one of the central principles of housing reform. There actually needs to be some housing in order to reform it. The Labour Mayor of London is delivering the lowest house building in London since 2009, while Labour's national housing delivery is nowhere near where it needs to be to meet their 1.5 million homes target. What are Labour doing to ensure that there are strong incentives to build more? Where is the second planning bill that they have briefed out to the media that they will need to introduce because of their failure to get the planning reform right first time? Mr Speaker, the Conservative Party is pro-development, which is why we have announced both the plan to review the London plan to improve on the Labour's failings in London and to ensure national development is done on a brownfield-first approach. Now, it is true, Mr Speaker, that ground rent is an additional cost to leaseholders, but it is reported that the Chancellor of the Exchequer is against capping ground rents because she believes it will deter pension fund investors. What does the Minister have to say to that? Mr Speaker, the government are claiming that this will reduce people's bills, and of course that would be welcome. But if leaseholder ground rent bills are simply replaced by soaring council tax bills, with some local councils now facing more than 30% rises in council tax due to the government's grossly unfair funding review, how will people be better off? In Inner London, which has a high proportion of leasehold flats, and councils there such as Wandsworth, Westminster and Kensington Chelsea are facing the double whammy of staggering rises in council tax and a council tax surcharge on top. Are the government in fact claiming to cut one cost on the one hand, but knowingly replacing it with even more costs on the other? Mr Speaker, I would be grateful if the Minister could answer these points in his reply. We will scrutinise the government's forthcoming Commonhold and Leasehold Reform Bill, and we will hold them to account on their promises on leasehold reform and housing. We look forward to studying the details and to the debates that will follow.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I note the initial positive tone from the Shadow Minister in welcoming the bill, and I'm slightly reluctant, Mr Speaker, on what is usually a matter of cross-party consensus to be too critical of the Shadow Minister. But it is a little bit rich to criticise this government, given that the previous government cherry-picked reform in a way that was at odds with the Law Commission's recommendations to treat all three of their reports as a holistic package, and has left us with an act that, as I said, Mr. Speaker, we have to make a series of changes through primary legislation to fix, just so that we can implement the provisions that remain. So I won't take any strictures from the honourable gentleman on ambition when it comes to leasehold reform. On the 2024 Act, I say very plainly to the Shadow Minister, we've switched on a number of the Act's provisions already. Immediately on coming to office, we enacted a series of provisions on rent charge arrears, on building safety legal costs, on the work of professional insolvency practitioners. On the 31st of October, we enacted further building safety measures. On the 31st of January, we switched on the 2-year qualifying exemptions for leaseholders. In March, we switched on the right to manage provisions, and we are working at pace to take forward the rest of that very significant package of secondary legislation was required, although some parts of those provisions, Mr. Speaker, do require us to make those fixes to the bill that sadly the previous government left us with. The honourable gentleman mentioned housing supply again. I'm going to take lessons from a party which torpedoed housing supply in the last Parliament, Mr. Speaker, by making a series of anti-supply changes to the NPPF, including the abolition of mandatory housing targets. And the honourable gentleman's criticism could be taken a little bit more seriously if his colleagues did not week in, week out come to me objecting to housing applications and telling me how our reforms will make it more permissive in their local constituencies. We're getting on, Mr. Speaker. We're taking forward the reforms to the leasehold system that are already on the statute book. We're bringing forward through this bill the wider reforms necessary to bring that system to an end, and it will be to the lasting benefit of millions of leaseholders across the country.
Chair of the Select Committee, Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I start by paying tribute to the Minister for his hard work on getting us to this stage. I think there were a few occasions, Mr. Speaker, where the Minister saw me and he went the other way, because I think he knew what I was going to ask him, and we wouldn't be here without his tireless work. I also want to highlight what the Minister said in terms of this being a cross-party issue and paying a tribute to the former member for Worthing West, Sir Peter Bottomley, for his work in chairing the APPG leasehold. For far too long, many leaseholders up and down the country have been caught up in this medieval system, leaving them with soaring rents and unreasonable fees. People who bought their homes in good faith, seeing that nightmare now transpiring. And it's right that the government finally bringing a change that will help millions of people up and down the country. The Minister's agreed to support our inquiry with the necessary evidence. Can the Minister confirm that he will support us by providing the government's response to the 2023 ground rent consultation in the coming days, so that we could get a better understanding on how this underpins the government's decision to cap ground rents at £250. Mr. Speaker, there are some things that we were expecting to see in this draft bill, yes, I have read it, which includes the Law Commission's unimpediment recommendations on enfranchisement and the right to manage for many people. Lord Beth's recommendations on this, on managing agents. Lord Beth has called for a regulator for teeth with proper enforcement. Can the Minister clarify what work the government is doing to ensure that this will be in the final version of the bill, or where, if they will be addressed elsewhere? The Minister also outlined a rough timeline for implementation. Could we get more clarity on when we expect to see this, so that those leaseholders up and down the country who've been waiting for a long time will finally get the help that they desperately need?
Minister.
I thank my friend, Mr. Speaker, the Chair of the Select Committee, for those fair and pertinent questions. Let me answer them each in turn. Mr. Speaker, we published a whole series of documents at 7 a.m. this morning, including the copy of the draft bill, but that also included a policy document setting out our rationale for the £250 per year ground rent cap, but we will of course make available other information, evidence and documentation to the Select Committee as needed and at the earliest possible opportunity. When it comes to implementing other Law Commission recommendations made in their 3 reports, Mr. Speaker, the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act 2024 implemented a significant number of the Law Commission's enfranchisement recommendations, a very small number of its right to manage recommendations, and none of its commonhold. We can't do everything in this bill. Honourable members who've had a chance to look will already seen it's a very large number of clauses already, but we are committed to enacting those remaining recommendations relating to leasehold enfranchisement and other recommendations over the course of the Parliament. In terms of implementation, Mr Speaker, different provisions will come into effect at different points in time. For example, the rent charge provisions I've described in my statement, we aim to switch those on quite soon after royal assent. Other measures will require secondary legislation. The ground rent cap we expect to be in place in 2028, but we will work with the Select Committee, as I said, Mr Speaker, to ensure that they can do the fullest and most robust job possible when it comes to giving this bill the enhanced scrutiny it deserves.
Gideon, Amos, Liberal Democrat spokesman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Liberal Democrats welcome the introduction of Commonhold framework, abolition of leasehold for new build flats, the end of forfeiture. All these are positive steps in the right direction. Our manifesto has been calling for an end to unfair residential leaseholds since Lloyd George called it blackmail in his 1909 People's Budget. But while I welcome those measures, we should be going much further. The Secretary of State himself this morning called ground rents money for nothing and a scam. So why should leaseholders continue to pay £250 for nothing? The government's proposals need to go further. For freeholders trapped in the fleecehold of unscrupulous property management companies, the blackmail of the great property rip-off is set to continue. There is nothing that will cap those charges in these proposals. And since residential leaseholds will still be with us for some time, millions of leaseholders need better protection from landlords' costs being passed on to them. They need capping of excessive service charges like £400 to change a light bulb and £4,000 to mow the grass. And help is needed for those trapped in unsafe and defective buildings, hundreds of thousands who are excluded from the building safety regime. Will the Secretary of State, therefore, will the Minister take forward Liberal Democrat proposals and immediately abolish residential leasehold charges, set ground rents at a peppercorn now, and regulate property and estate management companies as recommended in the BEST report, and cap unreasonable service and estate management charges?
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I thank the Liberal Democrat spokesman for those questions. I also share his passion. He often mentions Lloyd George. I share his passion for Lloyd George's radicalism on property law and other measures. Let me address the specific points he raises, Mr Speaker. During the passage of the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act in 2023, I think it was, I was clear that my instinctive preference when it comes to ground rents was for a peppercorn cap, fully eliminating ground rents, and the changes we are making ensure that after 40 years that change occurs. But having considered all the analysis and advice available to me as a minister, including the evidence gathered in response to the previous administration's 2023 consultation, I believe the policy we've set out is the right one. It is clear that an immediate peppercorn cap would carry significant risks, including some which might impact upon leaseholders. And the government also recognises there's a significant difference between regulating the creation of new leases and intervening to effect existing contracts and investments. On the functioning of the cap itself, Mr Speaker, I just want to make clear this is a maximum cash cap. If your lease is below £250 and doesn't include escalating clauses, your ground rents will not rise to £250. If your ground rents are over £250, you will see at the point that these measures are brought into force an immediate reduction. That, as I say, will benefit millions of leaseholders across the country. It's a huge cost of living intervention, and I hope the House can come behind it as the most just and proportionate way of addressing unregulated and unaffordable ground rent terms. On service charges, lastly, Mr Speaker, the honourable gentleman will know we ran a consultation last year on how we can standardise service charges, how we can increase transparency around service charges to ensure that leaseholders can better challenge the reasonableness of service charges at tribunal. But we don't intend to bring forward a cap, not least because doing so could actually harm leaseholders, particularly those in enfranchised buildings who might need to raise sums beyond the cap to carry out essential maintenance works on their buildings.
Angela Rayner.
Speaker, can I start by thanking my honourable friend for this extremely welcome statement, because I know personally first-hand how much he's put into this. However, we know, Mr Speaker, that vested interests have repeatedly resorted to lawfare to block such measures and may do so again. And we've already seen the scaremongering, Mr Speaker, begin with outrageous claims that this will impact on life-saving building safety work. So can my honourable friend reassure me that the government will not waver in the face of such threats but stand firm and ensure the will of this Parliament prevails? And I take exception from the opposite benches who did nothing on rent camps for the time in Parliament.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I very much thank my honourable friend for her kind words. She was an incredible champion for this reform agenda, for this piece of legislation, when she served as Secretary of State. On the matter of vested interests, you can take, Mr. Speaker, as I hope the House has, from the government's robust defence of the legal challenge brought to the 2024 Act by a group of claimants who are owners of freehold and other rising interests of dwellings, that the government will robustly defend the legislation. The High Court, incidentally, Mr. Speaker, comprehensively dismissed that challenge, allowing us in due course to take forward the relevant provisions. And I simply say to my honourable friend, as she is well aware, and she embodies this herself, taking on vested interests, opposed to change, to bring about improvements in the lives of working people is what Labour governments do.
Who is clocking?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, as a leaseholder myself, I do understand the issues that they face, and I look forward to carrying out the pre-legislative scrutiny that the MHLG committee will do. The conveyancing process also needs to be looked at, as I'm not sure that solicitors and managing agents actually point out historical service charges, whether the property's got a sinking fund, how much service charges have gone up. Can he reassure me and my constituents that that process of when you buy a leasehold property will also be looked at within this legislation?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. I have a lot of respect for him and his service on the Select Committee. He's got a lot of expertise in this area. I'd say two things. We published 2 consultations on the home buying and selling process to try and modernise that process. We're looking at some of these issues as part of that. But on service charges in particular, one of the reasons we had to go out and consult with quite a complicated and technical consultation on how we implement the 2024 Act's service charge provisions is precisely because it is complex. There's a lot of factors we've got to deal with. The response we've received, the incredibly useful feedback we've received to that consultation, will shape how we take those measures forward. But I want to be clear, we are talking about how, not whether we take them forward, and I want to see them brought forward as the earliest possible opportunity, because we absolutely know, Mr. Speaker, the impact that high and rising service charges are having on leaseholders across the country.
Navendu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, people in Stockport and Greater Manchester have suffered for many years with poor service and unfair treatment by managing agents. So can I ask the Minister if the commitment today by the government to protect leaseholders marks a break from years and years of weak regulation by the coalition partners and then the Conservatives?
Minister.
Well, we did see, Mr. Speaker, a considerable amount of deregulation under the coalition government and its successors. I will give the government credit, as I have done, for bringing forward the 2024 Act. It does include some limited relief for leaseholders, some new rights and protections. But we need to take forward and finish the job, as I made clear in opposition we would. We are, as I said, consulting on changes to increase protections over service charges. Incidentally, that same consultation, Mr. Speaker, included a number of proposals recommended by Lord Best in his 2019 report on the regulation of property agents, including the introduction of mandatory qualifications for managing agents. But we're clear that that consultation and the measures within it is not the final step in the regulation of managing agents, and we'll continue to reflect on the various other recommendations made in Lord Best's report.
Gagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unlike the chairman of our Select Committee, I've not read the full piece of draft legislation that was published at 7 o'clock this morning, and I can confirm that she was feeling a bit unloved whenever she saw the Minister running away from her. In terms of the actual statement, I think the Minister referred to the ground rents and the transition from 250 to zero peppercorn being effective in 2028, I think you may have said in the previous answer. Could he just clarify for the House, at the point it becomes effective, will he look to be backdating it, or do tenants as of today have to continue to pay their bills up until the point the legislation is effective?
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. The House, of course, can help us speed up the progress of this bill. I only make a rough estimate of 2028 based on the time it will take for this bill, once it's passed its draft phase and the scrutiny the Select Committee are giving it, that it's been introduced in its final form and that it gets through both houses, of course. Then we have to switch on the necessary secondary legislation. Up until that point, people should continue to pay their existing ground rents, but at the point we bring those measures into force, as I say, the cap will apply. And for lots and lots of leaseholders around the country, I'm sure he's got many, who are paying onerous, high ground rent terms way above £250 a year. At that point, that will be an immediate financial relief that will be hugely beneficial to them.
Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since I was first elected in 2010, I have seen the misery caused for constituents on Great Park, in Moorfields, in Grove Park, high ground rents, hikes in service charges, threats of forfeiture, and a total lack of accountability of the maintenance companies. So I strongly welcome today's announcements. I truly thank him for listening to these calls, but many will still find themselves living in existing leasehold houses, and they will remain trapped in this old, unfair and very frustrating system. So could the Minister explain to them, as they are asking me, what the government will do next to support them?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to have a separate conversation with my honourable friend about the specific conditions that pertain to leasehold houses. She will know, of course, that the 2022 Act made a number of changes in that area. In general, Mr. Speaker, I'd say the following. We want to, once our reform agenda is enacted, arrive at a situation where existing leaseholders can choose to remain in leasehold ownership, but taking advantage of the new rights and protections made available to them, including that cheaper and easier enfranchisement process if they want to extend their lease or buy their freehold. Or, Mr. Speaker, convert to Commonhold, which is why it's so important that we have now in the bill an easier mechanism to convert to Commonhold, which we are clear, and as I've said in the statement, is not only an alternative to leasehold ownership, but a radical improvement on it.
Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the introduction of this draft bill, and obviously as a member of the Select Committee, look forward to scrutinising it. I wonder if the Minister will make available to the committee evidence around the peppercorn rent and the 40-year requirement, I suspect to do with investor confidence, and if that could be brought forward. But my one overarching feeling with this bill, and I know it will be in my inbox when I get back to my office, is that people across the country would have expected to see action in this bill on service charges. Yeah. That's what we get contacted about consistently, about managing agents not performing their duties and charging too much for it. This bill was meant to be presented at the back end of last year, and I know that the government concluded a consultation in September. You want it to service charges to be addressed as soon as possible. Will we be able to get an additional clause in this draft bill?
Can I just gently say to everybody, I want to get everybody in, but I can't do it if people are going to make longer contributions. And I know there's a 40-year clause, and I don't want to hit it today. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Very clearly, this draft bill can't do absolutely everything, and it is the government's considered opinion that when it comes to service charges, because not least we don't intend, for the reasons I've set out, to implement a service charge cap, that we don't need provisions in this bill, that the provisions in the 2024 Act will do the job. But help is on the way, and I want to ensure that those provisions are switched on at the earliest possible opportunity.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I can congratulate my honourable friend on the magnificent job he's done with this legislation, and also my honourable friend, the chair of the Select Committee, who's pushed him and bothered him all the way down the corridors for months on end. It's now 8 years since the last Select Committee looked at this matter and recommended radical reform of leasehold. Could I say to my honourable friend that the right honourable friend, one of the challenges in my constituency is still those individual householders who try to buy their freehold and find that their holders, the freeholders, will not even respond to their requests and then push them through complicated and expensive procedures to actually get their entitlements. Can he give us assurance that that process, that procedure will now be simplified and cheapened?
Minister.
Thank you. I thank again my honourable friend for his kind words about my role in developing the bill. I can say to him very plainly, yes. If he looks at the consultation on service charge protections that we released last summer, there are proposals in there specifically addressing non-litigation costs and other measures. But it is our intention to ensure that when it comes to the enfranchisement process, it is, as I said, not only cheaper but easier for leaseholders to make use of those new rights and protections if they intend to buy their freehold, Mr. Speaker, or extend their lease.
Will Foster.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased the government have finally published their plans to reform the leasehold system, and I look forward to scrutinising it as part of the Select Committee. In my constituency of Woking, we have a range of issues with property management companies, whether that be mismanagement of the clock tower in Maybury or the proposed 30% increase in service charge at Brookwood Farm. All of those are unacceptable. Please can the Minister explain why he's not using this bill to end the wild west of unregulated property companies?
Well, again, Mr Speaker, we launched 2 comprehensive consultations before Christmas, both in respect of how we switch on the consumer protections for those living on freehold estates that are set out in the 2024 Act, and more widely how we end the prevalence of private management arrangements of the kind I think he is referring to. Again, this bill doesn't have to do everything, but relief is on the way through those new consumer protections for those living on freehold estates who suffer from management companies levying unfair charges.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to congratulate my honourable friend for resisting the call from those who have exploited leaseholders for far too long and capping ground rent. I welcome the assurance that we are moving from the outdated feudal system of leasehold to a proper commonhold future to give the full rights of ownership to leaseholders. But he will know that those who have taken money for no service or for poor service will resist this with all their might. And I would ask him to address in particular the loophole that may still exist for enfranchisement when developers put up a new building with the proportion of commercial property in its base, specifically to stop them making that loophole.
Minister. I thank my honourable friend for that question, Mr Speaker. We both served on the Bill Committee of the now 2024 Act and discussed many of these issues, and I can assure him we've given consideration to all of them. But he is right. We are now on a path, Mr Speaker, to a commonhold future. As I've said, this is a radical improvement on leasehold home ownership. And in general, while we will obviously ensure that leaseholders who wish to remain under leasehold ownership benefit from new rights and protections, it is our intention as a government to try to persuade as many leaseholders to convert to commonhold and to enjoy the benefits it provides as possible.
Rebecca Paul.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to start by thanking the Minister for his statement today, and I also want to thank him for all his support with respect to the issues we've had on Park 25 in Redhill. I very much appreciate that the Minister has taken residents' concerns very seriously. Can I ask what of these changes will be most beneficial for my Park 25 residents in Redhill? And can I also ask him whether he's given any more thought to my suggestion around mandatory adoption of communal land by local authorities going forwards?
Minister.
Of the provisions, I must say, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is hard to know without getting into the detail of the circumstances of her particular constituents which of these measures will benefit them most. If they are subject to high ground rent charges, then the cap on introduction will benefit them hugely. If they have suffered from the threat of forfeiture, which is, as I've said, a draconian, disproportionate means of enforcing lease terms, they will benefit. They'll benefit in a myriad of ways from the Act.
Darren Paffy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank and congratulate my honourable friend. Like thousands of long-suffering leaseholders across Southampton Itchen, I warmly welcome what has been announced today. In Sapphire Court development, residents have already been paying more ground rent than the cap, with a plan to double that. Thanks to the action of this Labour government, that will not be happening. So can the Minister say how soon Southampton's leaseholders will get the rights, the protections and the securities that they've been waiting long for and that they deserve?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. As I've said in response to previous questions, it's the government's intention to ensure that this draft bill and the final product that eventually comes forward after the scrutiny provided by the Select Committee is made law as soon as possible so that we can get these new provisions benefiting leaseholders. I'd say to him in general terms on the ground rent cap, no one will pay more from the ground rent cap we are introducing. Millions of people will pay less. Approximately 770,000 to 900,000 leaseholds with ground rents over £250 will see savings in this Parliament, with others seeing savings in greater amounts in Parliaments to come.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the news on the capping of ground rents for existing contracts, and I thank the Minister for the time he gave me last year. But he will recognise that many city centre developments require ongoing investment from pension funds. Could he say a little bit more about how his announcement will not spook the city and he will ensure that there continues to be a flow of investment into our high street?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, and it is a fair and reasonable one. The government considers the intervention we are making through this draft bill on ground rents to be a justified and proportionate approach to the specific problems leaseholders face as a result of high and harmful ground rents. We're introducing these reforms, as I've said, to deliver on specific commitments in our manifesto and in the context of a significant number of wider reforms to the leasehold market. We've carefully weighed the different options to meet our manifesto commitment on ground rents, and we've taken investors' concerns into account when developing this policy, which we believe strikes, as I've said before, a fair balance between leaseholders, freeholders and those invested in ground rents. But we recognise these reforms will have a significant impact on freeholders and investors. As I've said, we consider this, though, a justified and proportionate response.
Dame McKinnell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I should declare that I am a leaseholder. And I welcome very warmly the Minister's statement today, particularly on Commonhold as a co-op MP, something we've been campaigning for a long time, and the cap on ground rents is actually in sight. But there are issues in my constituency where a lot of my leaseholders are shared owners, and I wonder if the Minister can tell us now, or if he not, could write to me with detail about how that might impact some of the changes. And also, could he reassure us that there will be some government support, a hub of advice or pointing people in the right direction about how to move from where they are to Commonhold because of the complexities of doing that?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for that question. I'm more than happy to write to her about the issue of shared ownership specifically. She should know through our £39 billion social and affordable homes programme that we're making improvements to shared ownership as a tenure model. More widely, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can assure her that in terms of the provisions in this bill, they will benefit leaseholders in her constituency in the way she makes clear, Madam Deputy Speaker. But again, I'm happy to have a further conversation with her to get into the details, perhaps, of how the reforms will benefit her and what advice leaseholders can draw on, including the government-backed Leasehold Advisory Service.
Mike Martin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank the Minister for bringing this bill to Parliament and broadly welcome the provisions within it. Particularly this idea of conversion from leasehold to commonhold, I think is excellent. I do note that by my count there are about 4.8 million leaseholders in England. Does the government envisage driving this process so that people are empowered and encouraged to take that process forward? And when does he think that we'll get rid of the last leasehold in England?
Well, I think leaseholds will exist for some time to come. Indeed, people in various buildings may not, for whatever particular reason, wish to convert to commonhold, but it's absolutely our intention to make it easier to do so and to encourage as many leasehold homeowners to make that change as possible, because, as I've said, it's a radical improvement on leasehold ownership, not just an alternative to it.
Ben Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Residents in Chelsea and Fulham have experienced years of poor service and unfair treatment from managing agents. So I know how pleased they're going to be by this government's determination to do absolutely the right thing by leaseholders after years of sadly weak regulation under the Conservatives. And may I take this opportunity to say to my honourable friend how much residents in Chelsea and Fulham are looking forward to the further steps on service charges and managing agents that he's outlined. More, please.
We are absolutely committed, Madam Deputy Speaker, to strengthening regulation of managing agents. As I've said, some proposals were set out in the consultation on protections for leaseholders on charges that we released last summer, but there is more to come.
Ollie Dewhurst.
Speaker, now the hundreds of thousands of freeholders up and down the country who are locked in a financial arrangement with unaccountable estate management firms, I think will be very frustrated by today's statement because it does focus solely on leasehold. So can I ask the Minister to very clearly set out the next steps to tackle this enormous travesty that involves leasehold and estate management companies?
Minister.
I've got to correct the honourable gentleman. It doesn't solely deal with leasehold, as I made clear in the statement, Madam Deputy Speaker. The draft bill will repeal sections 121 and 122 of the Law of Property Act 1925, which ends the disproportionate remedies which give rent charge owners access to a draconian enforcement regime on freehold estates. But we are doing more, as I've said, those 2 consultations launched before Christmas, in particular to give new consumer protections to those living on freehold estates, and I hope you take part and respond to that consultation.
Dame Mayor Griffith. Very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, the capping of ground rent at £250 will give certainty and relief to leaseholders in Llanelli who face unpredictable and unjustifiable hikes in ground rent, and for whom the reform simply cannot come soon enough. So can the Minister give us a bit more detail about the timetable for the bill and ensure us that he will do everything he possibly can to ensure that the cap can be brought in as soon as possible? Yes, sir.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and I absolutely agree with her. She will have constituents, as I have, Madam Deputy Speaker, subject to high, unfair ground rent charges, in some cases escalating ground rent charges, particularly those that are inflation-linked. And people across the country can see those ground rent charges stack up to very significant amounts, and they will benefit from this cap when it's implemented. The cap on ground rents may take, we estimate, approximately 12 months after royal assent to introduce, but that is all subject to parliamentary timings, and if there is cross-party support on this issue, as there has been in the past, we can all work together to ensure that the bill makes speedy progress.
Carla Denyer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, leaseholders in Bristol Central are being ripped off. I am disappointed that the government won't be enforcing peppercorn ground rents immediately, although a £250 cap is an improvement and the movement towards Commonhold is really welcome. But there are big problems for leaseholders that are still unaddressed. So will the Minister please commit to tackling the soaring insurance premiums that have left homes unmortgageable and therefore left leaseholders trapped, unable to sell, unable to move in the wake of the cladding scandal?
I detected an unusual amount of support in that question from the honourable lady, which I very much welcome. On this specific issue of insurance charges, there again was a consultation switching on some of the provisions in the 24 Act that relate to insurance commissions. I'm more than happy to write to her to set out further detail, but we need to again bring those into force, and it remains our commitment to do so at the earliest possible opportunity.
Florence Sullivan.
Oh, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Sorry. I'd just like to thank the Minister for the statement. And while, as he's pointed out, that this cannot all be fixed in one go and that there are other levers that he's going to be pulling in place for the leaseholders, can you just give some reassurance to the leaseholders in Gravesham that have experienced this poor service, that this is about rebalancing the power, so actually those leaseholders are protected going forward?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. It is absolutely about rebalancing between leasehold and freehold interests on any manner of these provisions we're discussing in the draft bill. Freeholders have been in, often, I take the example of forfeiture, an unassailable position of strength vis-à-vis leaseholders, and that is what we're trying to address by introducing it, and I thank her for her support.
Kieran Mullen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hesitate to add to the Minister's interest, but he will know that we do have existing protections of some sort for leaseholders and freeholders, as right as he is to want to go further. I have residents in the Couden area of my constituency who have been sent letters by a company called Asset Investment Limited demanding thousands of pounds to, they say, regularise covenant breaches, which to me seem very unjustified and have some of the hallmarks of these unregulated charges that leaseholders have faced in the past. I think this is probably an issue that affects MPs across the House. Would you be so kind as to meet with me to see if we can explore how we might address this issue as well?
Minister.
I will happily meet with the honourable gentleman, Madam Deputy Speaker. As I've said, it's our intention as a government to end unjust and discriminatory practices that leaseholders are suffering from. And what we intend to do over the course of the Parliament, as I hope I've made clear, is to end finally and once and for all this iniquitous system. And that will take some time. It can't happen overnight, but that is our intent. And leaseholders across the country, including those in his constituency and my own, will benefit from that.
Dame Chiunwara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And let me congratulate my honourable friend in freeing so many of my constituents from the historic and indeed feudal injustice of the leasehold system. And let me urge him to ignore the clarion complaints of those freeholders who predicated their business model on the continued exploitation of working people through extortionate ground rents. Now, the Minister is familiar with the predicament of my constituents unable to extend their leasehold or buy their freehold because of the actions of the Mary Magdalene and Holy Jesus Trust. What hope can he offer them?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is right. There will always be vested interests who resist reform of the nature we're trying to take forward. There will also be always, Madam Deputy Speaker, naysayers out there for whom nothing we do is ever good enough. But this package as a whole, as I've said, will end the leasehold system in its entirety. And in a single parliament, I think that will be a huge achievement for this government. And we will succeed on that basis where other governments have failed. On the specific issue she raises, I'm aware of it. We've had many discussions about it. The provisions to address that issue are not in the draft bill, but my officials and I are in serious consideration to how and where we resolve the matter that my honourable friend has championed for so many years.
Leila Moran.
Deputy Speaker, I, of course, welcome this bill, but can I take this opportunity to urge the Minister to go further faster on these rip-off service charges? This is the thing that's clogging up my inbox, so much so I've got a service charges forum that I'm holding in Oxford in a few weeks' time. And there's one group in particular that I do think is underprotected, and that's social housing tenants. He'll know that in the 24 Act, there is more transparency over their service charges, but they don't have anywhere near as strong a hand as others in seeking redress. So would he agree to meet with me following this forum so that I can relay to him the issues that my constituents are having, particularly the social housing tenants?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can feel the glare of my private office as I agree to meetings across the House, but I'm happy to do so. The matters that she addresses are in the consultation we brought forward last year. It is an incredibly technical consultation and matter to standardise and make more transparent service charges across the country, which are not uniform in any way as things stand. But as I've said, we want to introduce those protections as soon as possible.
Josh Dean.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And today I'm thinking of one of the very first constituents I saw at one of my surgeries who was trying to sell one of her leasehold properties just to help fund the care of her mother. So will the Minister take this opportunity to reassure my constituent that this Labour government is on her side and is doing all it can to free her and others from what has become a nightmare?
Minister.
I can say to my honourable friend, we are on her side. And it is because so many leaseholders across the country are suffering from unjust and discriminatory practices that we have to overhaul and ultimately end this feudal leasehold system.
Josh Babarindi.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Eastbourne's leaseholders are being ripped off. The current leaseholder landscape has bred an industry of property management companies like Firstport and Eager Estates that prey on powerless leaseholders by charging eye-watering service charges, opaque calculations of them, and bullying residents into submission. And in failing to cap service charges and without the 2024 transparency rules in place, these reforms today still leave thousands of local leaseholders unprotected. When will the Minister finally crack down on exploitative property management companies?
Well, I've made clear to the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we've already set out proposals to strengthen the regulation of managing agents, but those proposals we've set out are not the summit of our ambitions. There is more to come. And I'd say to him just generally in the House that managing agents will play an even more important role as we progress towards a common hold future, and we've got to therefore end that abuse and poor service from unscrupulous managing agents that so many leaseholders face.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his diligent work on this issue? I know we all appreciate his expertise. So too will my constituents in Walthamstow, who are leaseholders with Clarion, and who in the last year have seen their ground rents go up from £200 to £650 and now this year to £857, including an admin fee. What can the Minister say to reassure my constituents that there will not be loopholes in this cap? We will ensure that all charges are included in the £250 limit.
Well, it is certainly not our intention, Madam Deputy Speaker, to allow any loopholes into the legislation, which is precisely why we have brought forward a draft bill rather than a final product, because such is the complexity and technical nature of the reform we're enacting here, that additional and enhanced scrutiny that the Select Committee will provide will be invaluable.
Tessa Munt.
Thank
Madam Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Minister's announcement, and I know it will bring some joy, particularly with the further announcements he's going to make later in Parliament to many of the residents in my part of the West Country. Can I draw his attention to the housing with care sector? I am not talking about those communities that are gated and have a caretaker or somebody who cuts the grass, but actually places like the charity, there's the Monica's Trust, St Monica Trust, who do some affordable rent, some shared ownership, but mostly they provide leasehold purchase, and there's a guaranteed buyback and resale which enables them to have some sort of way of updating their contracts for their residents and maintaining their affordability. They're really concerned about having an unnuanced ban on new leasehold care-led retirement living apartments, and I wonder what consideration he might have been given to the housing with care sector having some protection and his attention.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the draft bill includes, as published, exemptions that mirror ground rent exemptions for new leases entered into since the 30th of July 2022, based on that previous Act of Parliament. But we will consider through the PLS process whether other exemptions would be appropriate for a small number of leases granted for specialist purposes. But I can assure her I have given consideration and will give further consideration to the matter she raises.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since being elected, so many constituents have raised with me the absolute nightmare of being trapped in leasehold and fleasehold. So can I wholeheartedly welcome and congratulate the Minister on the action he's announcing today, particularly capping ground rent, ending leasehold flats in the future, and also the transition to Commonhold. On the transition to Commonhold, previous governments have made attempts to make this easier. Could he say a little bit more about what this government is doing in this bill to ensure that this government will ensure that transition rather than failing as previous governments have done?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. For various reasons, Commonhold failed to take off after its introduction in 2004. The legal framework is now hopelessly out of date. That's why we have to reform and reinvigorate Commonhold as a tenure. But when it comes to conversion, we want to put in place an easier conversion mechanism. We've given a great amount of thought to the Law Commission's recommendations in this area, and our approach has tried to strike the right balance to ensure that we meet those objectives. But my honourable friend is more than welcome, and I hope he does, contribute to that draft scrutiny bill process outside of the Select Committee.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In my constituency of East Walton, managing agents are still imposing excessive service charges with very little transparency. In retirement developments, flats will often not sell, even at well below the market value, and families are left paying deceased relatives service charges. And restrictive lease terms ban rentals, trapping families with empty, unsaleable homes. So I note the Minister's commitment to the consultation on service charges, but will he hurry up with the actions?
I can assure the Honourable Lady we are going as fast as we possibly can. But she, I hope, would agree, wouldn't want us to follow the example of the previous government, which rushed legislation forward that contains serious and specific flaws that then a future government or this government has to fix in due course.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today's announcement is literally life-changing for many of my constituents in York Central, and that is why we elect Labour governments. But today I want to just ask the Minister, for residents in leasehold complexes, often decisions are delayed because of absent landlords and also Airbnb owners. Will he ensure that when decisions are being made about the transfer to Commonhold, that those that don't respond don't hold up decisions to make the transfer?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much agree with my honourable friend that the draft bill will be life-changing for leaseholders across the country, freeing them, as I've said, from those unjust and discriminatory practices that so many of them face, and the financial costs from things like high ground rent terms. I'm more than happy to write to her on the specific issues she raises. It is some of these nuanced points that we do want to work through, and why we, as I've said, Madam Deputy Speaker, have brought forward a draft bill for enhanced scrutiny.
Munira Wilson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome many of the government's announcements today, and across Twickenham I'm regularly hearing from leaseholders who are suffering when service charges are jacked up without any notice, without any transparency, often for spurious maintenance issues. Now, I note the Minister has said he doesn't want to cap service charges, and I note he says that help will be on the way at some point, but he's refused to put a timeline on that. So could I just ask him, why doesn't he use this bill as a golden opportunity to bring forward Lord Best's recommendations on having a property regulator that could look at this in a nuanced and sensible way?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we have given serious consideration to how we take forward Lord Best's recommendations from the 2019 report. As I've already made clear, we're taking some of them forward already. But this bill makes reform in a number of specific areas, and as I've said in response to previous questions, it doesn't need to do everything, and we think there are other pieces of legislation, not least the 24 Act, that do lots of the work that honourable members are calling for. But we do want to ensure that the whole agenda is a comprehensive one and benefits leaseholders in the way that she and I both want.
Dr. Sam Mohammed.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I pay tribute to the work of the Minister, which I know will bring real relief to many of my constituents in Sheffield Central. However, leaseholders in the Riverside Exchange development are being blocked from securing their right to manage because of absentee leaseholders, which has left them trapped with eye-watering service charges which have increased from 1,900 to 5,500. Can the Minister set out how upcoming legislation will reform and reduce the minimum qualifying thresholds for right to manage, which is currently set at 50%?
Well, my honourable friend will be aware that there were very few provisions relating to the right to manage in the 2024 Act. We are committed, as I've said, to enacting remaining Law Commission recommendations relating not only to the right to manage but also leasehold enfranchisement, but I'm more than happy to write to her to try and get at some of the specific issues she raises in relation to that building in her constituency.
Adnan Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too welcome the Minister's statement today on leasehold reform, but I must press him and ask him as to what are the government's plans in respect of service and maintenance charges, so at least I can provide some reassurance to my constituents.
Hopefully the honourable gentleman heard my answer to a previous question. We intend to switch on the 2024 Act provisions that standardise service charges, that increase transparency around service charges, so that people can more easily challenge unreasonable charges at tribunal. I won't put a time on it because I don't have an exact date in mind, but I can assure the honourable gentleman and other members across the House that we are working as fast as possible to bring forward the necessary protections to ensure that leaseholders are protected from high and rising service charges.
Maya.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've heard from so many residents across Marton, Gisborough, Skelton, Hemlington Hall and elsewhere about issues with leasehold and fleecehold. And so what message does the Minister have for my constituents that he will tackle both of these issues in train and prevent my residents from unfair service charges into the future?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. As I've made clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are measures in this draft bill that will provide enhanced protections for residential freeholders on freehold estates, but we're taking other action, and I'd refer him, as I have other honourable members, to the two comprehensive consultations we launched before Christmas, one of which deals exclusively with switching on those consumer protections for those people living on freehold estates.
Claire Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My Thornbury and Yate constituents trapped in fleehold schemes, freeholders on privately managed estates, will still be exposed to escalating unregulated service charges and have no way of ensuring that the work they're paying for is actually done. The Minister has talked about the consultation and promised help is on the way, but can he promise my constituents protection from this exploitation in this Parliament?
Yes.
Preet Corgill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome this statement and congratulate the Minister. Does he agree with me that by strengthening and simplifying the route to Commonhold shifts power away from distant freeholders and back to residents, and that for leaseholders in Birmingham Edgbaston, this would mean control over service charges, repairs and management for the first time?
Absolutely, Madam Deputy Speaker. Commonhold is a purpose-built tenure designed specifically to own and manage a shared building without a third-party landlord and without a ground rent. That's why we want to see its uptake grow very significantly over the Parliament. That is what the measures in this draft bill are designed to provide for.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister very much for his statement? And it is indeed a joy to have some good news in the chamber for everyone out there. And we welcome that and thank you for that, Minister, and for government proposals. The government has an interest in Northern Ireland. While Northern Ireland has the ability to buy out leaseholds under the Ground Rents Act, that Act doesn't have a cap on ground rent in their calculations. So can I ask the Minister, if he would please for me, will the Minister undertake to discuss these bill proposals with devolved regions to enable a blanket costing to apply UK-wide at this time of austerity? Thank you.
Well, I always thank my honourable friend for his constructive interventions. As he knows, there's lots that England and Wales can learn from Northern Ireland, but as ever, and relates to our reforms to housing and planning as well as leasehold, there are many things that Northern Ireland can learn from the reforms we're bringing forward, and I can give him that undertaking to ensure that devolved administrations are kept up to date with what we're doing.
Steve Race.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm delighted that we're moving forward with capping ground rents and abolishing the feudal leasehold system. I've been supporting hundreds of residents across Exeter to fight really terrible practices by management companies, and I know these measures will put money back into people's pockets. Does the Minister therefore agree with me that the age of the exploitative leasehold system is finally over, and it's over for ripping off residents too, and this is because of a Labour government?
Stop.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We are calling time on abusive practices undertaken by unscrupulous property agents. We're calling time on the leasehold system as a whole. That is down to a Labour government finishing the job that the last government wasn't able to complete.
It would be really helpful if members could ask very short questions, and then I'll get you all in. Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for his statements, which will radically improve the system. He will be aware in my constituency over 170 houses have had their freeholds purchased by Andrew Milne, who is now demanding sums sometimes exceeding £25,000 to buy out freeholds, or threatening forfeiture and High Court action if they do not pay up. I welcome the Minister's commitment to ending forfeiture. Could he set out what additional steps the government is taking to regulate rogue freeholders?
Minister.
I will be careful in what I say in respect of this particular case, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I know that a meeting we had with my honourable friend and other Sheffield honourable members was postponed due to this legislation being brought forward. I will ensure that goes back in the diary as soon as possible.
Danny Beales.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today's news is welcome for leaseholders in my constituency who often see £400 or £500 ground rent with escalating ground rent throughout their lease. This will save them thousands of pounds over their leases. I've been shocked in my time as MP about the behaviour of managing agents. I know there's strong support in this place and in the other place for Lord Best's recommendation for a proper regulator of managing agents. Could the Minister outline what steps will be taken and what the timelines are for actions on managing agents?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. We are clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we need to strengthen the regulation of managing agents. I appreciate the strength of feeling across the House on that matter. As I've made clear, we'll continue to reflect on the various recommendations made in Lord Best's 2019 report, and I'm more than happy to engage with my honourable friend on his private member's bill, which I know deals with some of these matters.
Sarah Russell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for this, which demonstrates how Labour stands up for people against vested interests, and my constituents will, I'm sure, thank him for that. In terms, though, of the ongoing problems with unadopted estates, which he knows I've been raising with him since, in fact, before my election, I'd be extremely grateful if he could agree to come to my constituency and see some of the difficulties that my homeowners are having.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. I think I've already committed to ensuring that a visit to her constituency is on the very long list of requests that I have received, but I will bear her request in mind, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Sam Carling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I commend the Minister for bringing forward these brilliant measures to protect leaseholders. I have constituents across Hampton who own the freehold of their homes but pay several levels of service charge. Firstly, to managing agents like First Port, who are supposed to be responsible for unadopted roads, and secondly to Hampton Estates, which covers lots of the public open space, parks and drainage. So as part of our reforms, how will the government ensure that multi-level service charges like these are addressed, particularly on areas that are never supposed to be adopted?
Well, again, I'd refer my honourable friend to the two comprehensive consultations we launched before Christmas. We need to establish that new regulatory framework to provide consumer protections for residential freeholders on freehold estates. But we're also consulting, Madam Deputy Speaker, on how we reduce the prevalence of these private management arrangements, which are at the core of so many of the unjust practices that residential freeholders face.
Jessica Toll.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I've heard too many horror stories from leaseholders in Bournemouth West, and one constituent, Jeremy Green, described himself as feeling like a second-class citizen subject to the total autocratic control of his freeholder landlord and its managing agent. So can the Minister assure me that this Labour government is getting on with reform and giving leaseholders the protections and the dignity they deserve?
Well, it is completely understandable, Madam Deputy Speaker, that Jeremy and leaseholders across the country like him feel that the dream of home ownership has fallen so short, given their experiences of the leasehold system. That is why we have to end the system in its entirety, and this draft bill goes a long way to ensuring we're doing just that.
Peter Lamb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The package of measures today will transform the lives of thousands of my constituents, but on the issue of leasehold, residents in Forge Wood are currently paying thousands for services that other constituents receive for free. Can the Minister confirm that he will act at the quickest possible opportunity following the end of this consultation?
We do want to act as quickly as possible, Madam Deputy Speaker, in particular to bring in those new consumer protections provided for by the 2024 Act.
Sarah Hall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the statement today and the progress it represents, but I also want to put on record my thanks to the National Leasehold Campaign, which has spent many years campaigning tirelessly on behalf of existing leaseholders who have been trapped in an unfair and archaic system. For the benefit of Warrington South leaseholders trying to understand the 40-year peppercorn cap, can the Minister explain how the 40-year figure was arrived at and whether there is any scope for this transition to be brought forward so that relief is felt sooner? Hear, hear.
Well, I echo her remarks about NLC. Should also thank others, Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, Sir Peter Bottomley, who's now left this place, other champions, my honourable friend for Ellesmere Port, who've stood up for leaseholders so vocally over many years. The rationale for the ground rent approach we've chosen is set out in a policy paper that we've published this morning, but the Select Committee will be able to scrutinise the draft bill, provide suggestions, and that is the whole point of the PLS process, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I welcome the statement and the Minister's great work. I know that leaseholders and freeholders across my constituency of Dartford in places like Greenhithe and Ebbsfleet and Stone will hugely welcome the cap on ground rents and the rest of the detail of the draft bill. Can I, however, impress upon the Minister the need for us to go further on benefiting those who live on unadopted or freehold estates and address really poor practices by managing agents?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I am acutely aware of the strength of feeling on freehold estates. It can't be an either-or when it comes to ensuring that residential freeholders and leaseholders get the rights and protections they need. I can assure my honourable friend we're taking concerted action on both fronts.
Alistair Strathern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. This is a historic day for leaseholders, many of whom were let down by a lack of action on the last government, leaving them on the hook for exploitative ground rent levels, including one 90-year-old constituent of mine who was hit with a 9,000% increase in his ground rent. That cannot be right, and I'm really glad that the Minister's shown such leadership in ensuring we can put it right today. I know he agrees with me that we need to go further on unadopted estates too, so will he meet with me to ensure we can bring forward those protections as swiftly and effectively as possible too?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend has been an incredible champion for residential freeholders and leaseholders in his constituency. It's precisely because of ground rent increases of that scale that we are imposing via this draft bill a maximum cash cap. I'm more than happy to meet with him to discuss the draft bill and related matters.
James Asser.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I should also declare that I am also a leaseholder. And it's correspondence from leaseholders in West Ham and Beckton that makes up a lot of my inbox with problems of poor service, rising charges and homes that they can no longer remortgage or sell, causing financial difficulty. They will welcome very much what's been published today, but can the Minister reassure my constituents we'll be rising to all the challenges they face, swing the power back toward balance towards homeowners and tackle the real problem of service charges that are fleecing leaseholders for poor quality services and, frankly, services that often are not delivered?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker. His constituency is just over the river from my own, in many ways very similar. And he will receive, as I do, complaints day in, day out about service charge increases, about onerous ground rent terms. It is precisely why we are taking action through this bill and outside of this bill to provide relief to leaseholders of the kind that he seeks. And we are going to, as I've said, over the course of this Parliament, end this system for good.
Conor Rand.
Thank
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And since being elected, I've worked to support leaseholders across Altrincham and Sale West, meeting residents at Maple Court, Budenberg and St James's Court. And when I surveyed local leaseholders on what they needed from the government, reducing the unfair charges they face was the most common response. Doesn't today's announcement show we finally have a government that is listening to leaseholders and putting money back in their pockets?
I say to my friend, the honourable friend, that is absolutely right, Madam Deputy Speaker. And in this area and so many others, the cost of living and addressing the affordability crisis that so many families across the country face is this government's driving mission. And when it comes to leaseholders, the reforms in this draft bill will be transformative in terms of what they do, in particular on ground rents, but in terms of other protections being brought forward.
Jack Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his genuinely groundbreaking statement today. It feels like a little while ago since the Minister visited Ipswich to talk to local people about the building safety crisis and leasehold. He then, Shadow Minister, and myself, a parliamentary candidate. Now we're capping ground rents, making it easier to move to Commonhold and scrapping leasehold for all new builds. So is this a case of a Labour government keeping its promises and making a real change for many people up and down the country?
That is absolutely right, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I can assure my honourable friend that we have given consideration to building safety remediation in the design of this legislation. Freeholders' obligations, I should make clear, to ensure their buildings are safe are not related, for example, to the right to collect ground rents. Many buildings already operate on a peppercorn ground rent and are subject to the same legal obligations as other buildings, so that we don't want to see the impact that some outside in the country may be concerned about.
Jonathan Brash.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituents in Hartlepool are facing outrageous estate management charges, including a 49% increase in the administration fee by management company Seller just this year on the Marine Point and Long Branch Homes estates, as well as ongoing charges by Praxis on the Wynyard News estate. We have heard it time and time again from members today during this statement. When will we switch on the protections of the 2024 Act and give the necessary powers so that homeowners can challenge unfair charges, hold estate management companies to account and prevent families being unfairly burdened?
I simply say to my honourable friend, as soon as possible. What we are bringing into force through those new consumer protections is a new regulatory framework that takes some time to get right, but I absolutely want those protections in place as soon as possible so that we can provide protection to his constituents and others across the country who are suffering from the setup that he describes.
Josh Newbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yet again, we have the wonders of hindsight from the party opposite. In the immortal words of Beverley Knight, shoulda, woulda, coulda, means I'm out of time, and the Tories certainly were. I thank my constituents, including Rob from Heath Hayes and Daniel and Rebecca from Britain, who've written to me to stress the need for these reforms. Alongside them, I very much welcome the draft bill. Does the Minister agree that, given these proposals will not only reform a feudal system, but will cap ground rents at £250, this is another way this government is putting money back into the pockets of families struggling with the cost of living?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't want to be too critical of the party opposite because they did bring forward the 2024 Act. They did move the dial when it comes to the public conversation about things like ground rents, but ultimately they didn't finish the job and it will fall to a Labour government to do so.
Can I thank the Minister for his statement? I'm going to allow a couple of moments for the front benches to swap over.